Got a lot of financial stuff to talk about today. We're closing out chapter 21, but we will go back and pick up the other chapter 14 and 15 I was talking about. Actually talking about this will help you in both chapters. You will see how they relate to each other. Financial legislation. Have we talked at all about that yet? Have we mentioned the Dodd-Frank Act in this class? Okay. Well, this is me mentioning the Dodd-Frank Act. And basically, the background of this is coming out of 2008. We had the meltdown of the markets. We had financial legislation all over the place. The Dodd-Frank Act, if you ever see that, it's probably going to be associated with the CFPB, which doesn't show up on that slide. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the significance of the CFPB was it basically created an umbrella department that covered several federal financial legislation departments. So if I had to make a note about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, here's the way I like to say it succinctly. Don't start writing down yet. This took all these departments that were scattered all over the federal government, and it basically said, hey, let's put together, here comes the important part. Here come the important words. It put together several pieces of legislation dealing with federal, financial, consumer legislation. And I really don't care what order you put those words in. Federal, this is federal legislation, right? It has to do with finance. And these are consumer protections. Federal, financial, consumer legislation. I want you to relate Dodd-Frank and the CFPB to that's what it did. It created an umbrella department to place all these things that were spread across the federal government, okay? The reason that we're going to talk about it today is going to have to do with its association with what's known as TRID. This is going to be an important word for you. TRID. It's actually an acronym. Capital T, capital R, I, D. T, capital R, capital I, capital D. We're going to talk about two significant pieces of legislation today. One of them is going to be known as Truth in Lending. Truth in Lending, not T-Roof. The T stands for Truth in Lending. Sometimes you hear it referred to as TILA, Truth in Lending, whatever A stands for. Act. Truth in Lending. Okay. The R stands for RESPA, which we're getting ready to talk a lot about. RESPA stands for the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. The Real Estate Settlement Procedures. Notice we've been talking about settlement procedures all day with our mini closing statements. Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. And then the ID stands for Integrated Disclosure. Integrated Disclosure. What we're going to talk about over the next several minutes, literally, is the fact that as a consumer, as someone borrowing money to buy a house, there are things you need to be told. You're the consumer. This legislation is for your protection, right? So truth in lending, don't write this down right now. I will give you ample opportunity to write it down a little bit later. Truth in lending deals with the true cost of the money that you borrowed. Do any of you know what the interest rate on your loan is? Mine's 4 1/8. Okay? But that's not my APR. When I went and borrowed money, they calculated it based on 4 1/8, but they charged me some finance charges, which affected what's known as my APR. The APR is said to be the true cost of the money that you borrowed. I doubt seriously if many of you know your APR unless I told you to go look for it, but most of us can quote the interest rate. You were told what your APR was. You know why? Because there's a law that said that the lender had to do it for you, okay? The true cost of the money that you borrowed. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about RESPA here over the next few minutes. And RESPA deals with the itemization of your settlement costs. The parties must be fully informed in regards to their settlement costs. Realistically, the buyer right? So these two pieces of legislation, I know they sound the same, but they're a little bit different. The true cost of your money borrowed plus the itemization of where your money went in a transaction. The significance of the TRID is that all this is put into one document now, or one little set of documents now. So in one document, you can get to see the truth in lending statement. You can also get to see RESPA, and you are told when you go to borrow money, this is actually important, literally within 3 days of loan application, you are given estimates on what your closing costs are going to be. You are also given what your APR is going to be, the true cost of the money borrowed. You go and apply for a loan to buy your house, you're going to be told that within 3 days of the day you make your loan application. The Act even goes so far as to define what application is. Once you supply the lender with a certain amount of information about you, that is what starts the clock. That's the loan application. Now, you still don't see where this is going. So let me give you an idea about where this is going. Don't worry about writing this down. Just understand the history of this. As a borrower, don't you want to get the best rate possible? Now listen, there's nothing wrong. Just like anything, I don't know if you know this or not, but loans, you can pay more for loans or you can pay less. Some of it has to do with service. Bless you. Some of it has to do with service. Just like you can buy a Mercedes or you can buy a Hyundai. That's up to you. But having said that, what was going on in the past prior to the creation of these laws, what was going on is a borrower would go in, they're borrowers to the lender, they're buyers to us, they're borrowers to the lender, okay? Would go into a lender and they would start talking about a loan, and the lender would ask them up front, say, hey, we need some money up front, we're going to pay for your credit report and other things like this, and they would charge you an exorbitant amount of money, it'd be several $100, okay? Well, let me ask you this. How many people can you afford to go shop your loan if they're each going to charge you several $100? I can't talk to but so many lenders if I want to have to pay each one of them $400 or $500, right? So what was happening under the old laws, what it allowed was it allowed for you to be charged this upfront money. And I'm going to tell you something. If I pay $400 or $500 and they quote me a rate that's a little bit high but not confiscatory, I probably would go with them anyway, rather than pay somebody else $400 to do the same thing. So having said that, these laws, matter of fact, you may have heard this in advertisement. These are basically the know before you owe laws. Have you heard that in any of their ads? Know before you owe. The idea is that there are only limited things that they can charge you for up front. They still charge you for the credit report up front, but it has to have a true representation of what the credit report costs you. In other words, they can't charge you $400 for a $21 credit report. Because with $21 for a credit report, I can shop with several lenders at that. I'll talk to 3 people. So the idea is that consumer, hey, go out and shop different lenders, look at what their offers are, compare, pick the one that's best for you. That was the idea behind this legislation. It's not bad stuff. I'm not overly regulatory, but at least this gives the consumer the ability to shop, should they choose to shop. Within 3 days of loan application, and loan application, because it's so discreetly defined now, you don't have a ton of money tied up in this process, the lenders have to give you this information, your APR, and the itemization of your closing costs. Now you can take that number, go to another lender, and compare, and decide which one's best for you. So watch this, all this is tied to Dodd-Frank and the CFPB. TRID. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Good faith estimate plus your early truth in lending. There's your itemization. Truth in lending is going to be your APR. That's going to come out to something that's referred to as your loan estimate. This is part of the TRID at this point. Your loan estimate, you already know that information. Now here's the beauty of this. You decide which package you're going with. You decide what loan you're going with. You do all the diligence necessary for your house. You're moving closer and closer and closer to closing. Now guess what's going to happen when you get close to closing? 3 days prior to closing, you're going to get your final numbers. You're going to get your HUD, your final truth in lending numbers, and that's going to be referred to as your closing disclosure. The way it looks on the in the book, you'll look at something and we'll call it closing disclosure. It's what the old HUD used to be. We don't really have the HUD 1 any longer on these loans, but that's the itemization of your closing costs. So in other words, 3 days prior to closing, you should get these statements. Would you agree that if that was a true good faith estimate, it should be very close to your closing numbers, shouldn't it? Okay? If that was your early truth in lending APR, we quoted you 4.75% for your APR. Don't you think that should be basically the same number? Hey, borrower, if you didn't change loans, it should be the same number as what you did at the time of loan application. And those numbers, the attorney will look at them and say, hey, they match or are very, very close to our original numbers, and they will go on a closing disclosure. What page will be on the Book of Virginia? Was it 580 and 581? 580 and 581. I don't need you to pore over these documents, but I would like you to at least look at these documents where it takes you from your loan estimate all the way through to closing, where you see your closing disclosure. It starts on 580, 581, and it runs for several pages, and you will see where the bank is making representations to you. Okay? That's the TRID. Truth in Lending, RESPA, integrated into one disclosure, and you'll get to see that in your textbook. Questions or comments so far? Yes? It actually stands for Good Faith Estimate. Okay? Good Faith Estimate. Yeah, don't worry so much about the HUD. HUD stands for Housing and Urban Development. It was a form that was created by HUD. That word, a little bit antiquated. It was just making a point to you historically. That's where the itemization took place. Today you have that in the closing disclosure. Okay, now we said all that in setting up RESPA. Now we're going to talk specifically about the RESPA part of TRID. Okay, when we go back to finance, we'll talk about the truth in lending part. Are you ready to take some notes on RESPA? Okay, if I were to give you my brief definition of what RESPA does, it would do something like this. RESPA informs the parties of their settlement cost. RESPA informs the parties of their settlement cost. Literally an itemization of your settlement cost. Within 3 days of applying for your loan, you should get what according to RESPA? Good faith estimate? Let's talk about that good faith estimate. Let's talk about why it's truly a good faith estimate today. Now again, let me tell you a little bit of history, and then we'll talk about the testable part. The history of this, and I don't know if you ever had this experience, but we had problems in the past with buyers being quoted what they believed what the lender thought your settlement costs were going to be. Then you show up the day of closing and you find out your settlement costs are $800 more than what you, again, I'm making up that number, but $800 more than what you thought your settlement costs are going to be. Is that a big deal for most buyers? That'd be a big deal for me. If I was told I had to bring $4,200 to close and I had to bring $5,000, that's a big difference to me. So the problem was the buyers got a dilemma on their hand. If they want to close, they have to figure out how to come up with $800 or figure out how to massage this deal so that they can still close with the amount of money that they have. It caused undue burden and undue stress, and I got to be honest with you, I don't think it was fair. I think this was people sometimes playing fast and loose with the facts, not fully informing the buyer. What are they going to do? They're going to walk away at closing? No, they're going to come up with $800. They're going to call their dad and say, I need $800 more in my checking account. Send it so I can close this transaction, okay? Not fair. So when we went to these rules regarding RESPA, this actually preceded the CFPB and the Dodd-Frank Act. That didn't come around until October. But the rules regarding RESPA several years prior to that started dealing with a true good faith estimate. And what it dealt with, or what are known as tolerance categories. So just mention the concept of tolerance categories in association with good faith estimate. Go ahead and put it in your notes. And let me talk to you about these tolerance categories. So all this is under RESPA requirements. Under RESPA requirements, the first thing that RESPA requires is a good faith estimate, and what I have just suggested to you, subject to certain tolerance categories. Okay, Tolerance categories have to do with how much a number can change from the time that you were quoted it by your bank. So that you go in to apply for a loan, the lender gives you a quote. There is one category of tolerance known as zero tolerance.
Can you say what you said again about
Which
tolerance
part?
categories?
Say again, so.
What did you say about tolerance categories?
What tolerance categories have to do with is how much a number can change from the time it's quoted to you by the lender. Does that make sense where we're going with this? I don't want there to be an $800 surprise at closing, right? So the tolerance categories, there's one category that is known as zero tolerance. Zero tolerance literally cannot change from the time that the lender quotes it to you until the time you close. By the way, please understand, this assumes that you did not change loan types. If you change loan types, you will get new estimates, okay? But assuming you stay in the same loan from the time they make you this quote to the time you close, there are some numbers that literally cannot change. Let me give you examples of those and then you tell me why. Your loan origination fee. Your loan origination fee. Your discount points. Once those are quoted to you, if you stay in that loan, they cannot change. Can somebody tell me why those numbers should never change?
Well,
Less specific, less specific.
well, I would say loan origination fee should be a standard fee.
It's certainly negotiable, it's certainly negotiable. But keep in mind, the lender quoted to you what it was, and then all the way up to closing, it should not change.
Based on material facts, so they.
Well,
Well,
because
because as long as the loan doesn't.
why don't I just give you the answer? How
Yeah.
about this? Try this. Who controls that number? The lender controls that number. Because they control that number, why would it change? From the time I tell you what your discount points and loan origination fee are, they're in control of that by the time y'all reach an agreement. There's no compelling reason for them to change it. Let me give you something to compare it to and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's one category known as a 10% tolerance category. Meaning that these numbers can change by how much?
10%.
Up to 10%. It's actually what we consider to be an aggregate category. In other words, all these numbers together can't change by more than 10%. One of them could theoretically change by more than 10% as long as the others don't do so as well, if it's within that category. So let me give you an example of these. These are what we refer to as bank-referred services. These are bank-referred services. When you borrow money from a lender, you're going to go buy a house, okay? What type of services are they going to require you to have? Maybe an attorney, because they need somebody to close the loan as well, okay? Maybe an appraisal, maybe a title company. Now, if the lender refers these services to you, listen closely. Can the lender tell those parties how much to charge? No. They have a decent idea of how much they charge, and they have to give you an estimate, right? So they give you an estimate of this category. So let's say the attorney, the title company, the appraiser, it's going to be $2,200 aggregate, right? So let me ask you this: what's the maximum that your loan, expenses could change by in that category? 10%, $220. Now again, look, that would make me mad if it did change by $220, but that's probably not going to cause a transaction to fall through. And I knew from the beginning that the bank can't control these charges. All they can do is refer me to these services. Yeah.
Okay, I do have a question. With regards to these tolerances, they can go up or down?
They could go up or down. Matter of fact, listen to this. You know what lenders mostly do today?
They give you a higher?
In some cases, they actually quote high. And the reason they quote high is because they do not want this to be out of tolerance. There's a penalty to the lenders if they're out of tolerance. And that penalty is that they can't sell that loan in the secondary market. Now let me ask you this question. How important is it for most mortgage bankers to sell that loan in the secondary market? That's their business model, to create loans that they package and sell in the secondary market. So if it's out of tolerance, it stops everything until they figure out which way they want to go. Because of that, they often quote high. Because, Evan, are you going to complain if your expenses are lower at closing? No. I mean, they don't overly do it, but they often shoot just a little bit high to make sure they're okay. There's actually one category known as unlimited tolerance. In other words, these could go up indefinitely. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, golly, that kind of shoots the whole plan. But here's the deal. Unlimited tolerance category. These are services that you selected. As a borrower, you didn't use the attorney that's recommended by the bank. You decided to use your brother-in-law to do it. Your brother-in-law charges you twice what the lender had quoted. Well, that's not the bank's fault. That's your fault. Okay? And so unlimited tolerance category, those are things you selected. The bank has no control over that. Now let me go back and look at those categories again. Zero tolerance. If this is a fee that the bank can charge, it better not change. Okay? 10% tolerance will allow for a little bit of change there because the lender can't control those. They haven't said that it can't be outside that 10%. Okay? And then you pick some, you pay for it.
So back to this, you said with the 10% tolerance category, if the total of those particular
Correct.
services cannot, in total.
Exactly. Yeah, the attorney could go up by 12% if the title company, maybe went down in price if they had underquoted one and overquoted on the other. Okay? Yeah, it's an aggregate category. Okay? I really just need you to know that they exist. I can't imagine us getting into a deep, detailed question about how this works. If so, I probably wouldn't be qualified to teach it anyway. But that's the idea behind the good faith estimate. It should truly be a good faith estimate. From the time it was quoted to here, it shouldn't change a whole lot. Okay? Now let me ask you this. Agents, you gotta be smart sometimes as well. Think about what we did earlier today. Think about some of the math that we did earlier today. Tell me something else that can majorly affect how much a buyer is going to have to come to closing with.
Access.
With taxes, but you kind of do those up front, so you can figure those. You can figure those. What if you were scheduled to close on the 28th? You ended up being delayed, you had to close on the 5th. What did that change dramatically?
And interest.
The interim interest. The interim interest. That's not the bank's fault, okay? People need to prepare the buyers for this. Yes, you're going to have to bring an additional $500 to close it. Well, why is that? Well, because you close at a different date, so the interim interest is going to be dramatically more. That's based on days, not a quote from the lender. Okay? Keep your eyes out on stuff like that. All right, what do I want you to know about RESPA? RESPA is where the good faith estimate comes in. So far, so good? But I'm not through with RESPA because there's actually three things that are required by RESPA. The first one was the good faith estimate. The second one is a settlement cost brochure. Settlement cost brochure. Yeah. The settlement cost brochure. It used to be called Shopping for Your Home Loan. Shopping for Your Home Loan. Have you ever heard those commercials? Oh, maybe it's just inside my head. I thought I'd heard it somewhere, but maybe I made that up. No, they used to have a silly commercial. I think it's still called something close to that, but it's a settlement cost brochure. Matter of fact, let's see how sharp you are after lunch. What do you think a settlement cost brochure informs the consumer of? Yeah. You're good. Listen, guys, if I were you as a buyer's agent, I would pick one of these up one time and take a look at it. Because the lender should be explaining this stuff. You do understand that this has less to do with us than it does the lender. But you're going to become a trusted advocate for your client. So they're going to ask you, what's an underwriting fee? Why are they charging me $300? Why are they charging me these BS fees? Okay? There is an explanation. Whether they like the explanation or not, they might can shop around and find. But you know what an underwriter fee is? Maybe $350 to $500. That's money, right? Underwriting, someone's going to look at that loan and make sure that it meets the requirements of the secondary market. Okay? That's what underwriters do. They make sure it's packaged so that it meets the needs of the secondary market. Now, having said that, banks used to have an in-house underwriter. You know what they do a lot of times today? They pay a third party to do it. And if they pay a third party to do it, they're not going to eat that money, are they? They're going to charge it to the borrower, right? Tax service fee, $250. You know what a tax service fee is? I didn't know either. I had to go look it up. Tax service fee is, you remember that escrow account that you have? Somebody has to let it know every year to pay the taxes. You think they can just automate that and say September 1st, cut a check for the taxes. But apparently there's a fee associated with that, a tax service fee. Okay? Is it a BS fee? I don't know. I'd rather not pay it than pay it, but at least it has an explanation. And the consumer, well informed, can choose whether they want to pay these fees or to another lender. Okay? And by the way, later on we'll talk about loan servicers. Now think about the way this process works. The mortgage lender goes out, makes you a loan, you get money, they get the collateral of the house, they package the loan, somebody's going to get the benefit of that interest, right? They sell it in the secondary market. How does a mortgage banker make their money? They make a little bit on the pass-through, right? They make a little bit of money on the pass-through, and then they service the loans. They get paid those loan origination fees and also these servicing fees as well. That's how mortgage bankers actually make their money, and they do it a gazillion times a day. Okay? All right, the settlement cost brochure. Pick one up sometime. The third thing that RESPA requires is most loans that are secured by your residential property are closed using the TRID documents. Most loans backed by what is security? Your residential property, the house you live in, your primary residence. If you get a loan and it's secured by your primary residence, I'll just bet you that you're going to use those documents right there. What if you're buying a business? This doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to businesses.
Can you say that sentence again?
Which sentence would you like to hear?
Most secured by your residential property are closed by.
Most loans secured by your residential property, you will use the TRID documents. If you want to move that sentence around, you will use the TRID documents if you're borrowing money secured by your primary residence. Did you get the sentiment in there? That's what I really want, was the sentiment. Okay.
So that's number 3.
Right, and you said,
Yes.
what's the second one first? The first is
The first one is a good faith estimate. Second one is a settlement cost brochure. The third one is most of them you're closing on these TRID documents, on this closing disclosure. Okay? RESPA requires those 3 things.
Is RESPA the same thing as regulation? So it's.
Yeah, I believe it is, but we'll typically use RESPA to discuss that.
So I'm trying to understand.
Number 3 is you're using, RESPA requires you to use the TRID
Oh, we're
documents.
required to use those documents?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay? Now, think about this for just a second. We talk about these as being consumer protections, right? So this applies to loans as your primary residence has collateral. Make sense? That's why it doesn't apply to business loans, because business loans, they assume you're dealing professional to professional. They don't need consumer protections for that. Okay? This is if you're a primary residence, use this collateral for this loan, you're using these TRID documents, I promise you. Okay? Those are the 3 requirements of RESPA. The biggest, of course, for our purposes would be that good faith estimate. It should truly be a good faith estimate today based on these new laws. Now, I want you to we're still going to talk about RESPA, but we've kind of finished those little 3 requirements of RESPA. What was the purpose of RESPA? To fully inform you of your closing costs. How does it do that? Good faith estimate. If you didn't understand that settlement cost brochure will tell you what these words mean. If you didn't understand that, we'll give you a closing disclosure, which will literally itemize every dollar that you spend in the transaction. Got it? You're fully informed now. The other thing that RESPA does, which is kind of interesting, is RESPA is the law that prohibits kickbacks between settlement service providers. RESPA is the law that actually has a red stop sign. Eliminates kickbacks between settlement service providers. Prohibits kickbacks between settlement service providers.
that's those questions I read that say after closing, say, property, the builder gave the agent $50
Let's not convolute it too much right now. We'll be fairly specific about that. That may fall into a little different category. Here's the key part. Here's the key part of what I want you to know. RESPA prohibits kickbacks between whom? Settlement service providers, okay? Now, I'll tell you why I emphasize that word in just a moment, but settlement service providers would be things like your lender, closing attorney, inspectors, appraisers, settlement service providers. Home warranties would fall under this as well. Okay,
Say that list again, close lender.
Yeah, it is neither comprehensive or perfect, but yeah, it includes lenders, that's gonna be a key one, attorneys,
Right.
closing attorneys. What else did I say? Home warranty companies, inspectors, appraisers.
Okay.
Era, what do I want you to focus on? Settlement
Settlement.
service providers, okay? And then here's an example of this. This is a big no-no. You will know this inherently when you go in the field. I have a lender that I like to use, or a few lenders that I like to use. You come to me as a buyer, you don't have a lender, I'm gonna recommend one of these people to you. Do you know why I recommend these lenders to our buyers?
You trust.
I trust them. I think they're gonna make me look good, okay? I think they're obviously gonna be good for my clients as well, right? They explain things really well. Let me tell you why you're not gonna send a buyer to a lender. You're not gonna send a buyer to a lender because they give you $200 every time.
It's
That
illegal.
you, because it's what?
Illegal.
It's a big deal illegal. It's a big deal illegal, okay? This is a RESPA violation. We're talking about $10,000 fines for these type things, okay? But Eric, here's why it's important for exam purposes. Now, if I want to be really, really hard on the exam, let me throw this concept out there to you, okay? Does that mean you can never take a kickback from a service provider?
You just have
What's the key difference?
to disclose it.
What's the key difference between, say again?
Settlements.
Yeah, under RESPA, you can't receive any kickback from a settlement service provider. But from a service provider, like someone who does, who cleans carpets, or someone who does work, you know, like a maintenance person or something like that. If I recommend to a seller a carpet cleaning company, and that carpet cleaning company pays me $100 every time that I refer them, can I accept that? Yes, as long as I do what? Disclose it. But on settlement service providers, I don't care if you disclose or not, you can't receive it, it's illegal. The logic behind this is because it's adding cost to the consumer. Make sense? Not going to receive kickbacks between settlement service providers. Why, Eric?
How do you differentiate what you can receive and what you can't receive?
Okay, settlement service versus service providers.
Okay.
Settlement-
Service, no, service providers, if it's disclosed.
If it's disclosed, and that's actually it, right there. It's that important. Say again? Yeah. Yeah, it actually, if they're involved in money changing hands in the settlement, it's probably not. But if it's someone that provides you materials or labor or something like that, it's probably okay if it's disclosed.
So what would be an example of a regular service provider receiving thank you fees, thank you, amounts of money? I don't know, like what would be an example of that?
For a service provider or a settlement service provider?
Service provider.
Well, remember the example I gave you is the one I want you to focus on. I recommend to a seller a certain company to clean their carpets, and that carpet company pays me $100 every time I refer them. Can I receive that $100?
You can, but you have to tell them the amount. You just say, I receive.
I want to take you all the way back to Rule 109. Rule 109, if you're receiving third-party compensation, you have to disclose in a what? In a what?
Full and final.
Full and timely manner. Full and timely. Full would indicate, yes, you have to tell them exactly what you're getting.
I guess it seems similar to like bloggers on the internet when we read them recommending
How the heck did we get the bloggers?
products. It just, well, because it's something to help you remember. They have to state if they're receiving fees. They don't state how much, but from the company that they're recommending.